It was my 78th birthday. I had a crown of fresh daisies on my head, hand-woven by my youngest granddaughter the night before. The living room was glowing with golden balloons. The sweet scent of peach cobbler danced through the house. My oldest son was by the stereo playing a gospel vinyl that crackled just right. My daughters were laughing in the kitchen, arguing over whose potato salad was better. And right there in front of me stood my husband of 40 years, holding a cake with trembling hands and a candle that flickered like a prayer. All I could think in that moment was, this is joy. This is what all the hard years were for. But I never got to blow out those candles the way I planned. Because just as the room burst into a chorus of happy birthday, my 16-year-old granddaughter leaned in close, right into my ear. Her voice barely a whisper. She said, "Grandma, I saw something." She was shaking, not from cold, but from the kind of fear a child shouldn't carry. At first I thought maybe she'd seen a spider or broken something she thought I'd be upset about. But then, she took out her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen like she wasn't sure whether to press play or protect me. And in that split second, standing in my kitchen while everyone clapped and cheered behind me, I saw her eyes fill with tears. That was the moment. That's when the joy in my chest turned heavy, like bricks pressing down on a heart that had just wanted to celebrate one more year of love. Now, before I tell you what happened next, let me slow down and say this properly. Thank you for being here with me, child. I know you didn't just stumble onto this story by accident. Maybe you're going through something yourself. Maybe you've held your own silence at someone's birthday table. Maybe your smile has been hiding something deeper. So tell me, where are you listening from? Are you in your kitchen? Your porch? Lying in bed, trying to make sense of something that's been tugging at your spirit? You're welcome here. And if you've got a story buried deep, share it in the comments below, or just sit quietly with me under this old porch light. You don't have to speak before you're ready, because what I'm about to tell you, it's not just about betrayal. It's about waking up after decades of sleepwalking through someone else's version of love. It's about what happens when the truth doesn't whisper anymore. It shouts in the middle of your celebration. And child, it changes everything. Let's begin. Now, before that birthday moment, before the video, before the whisper that broke my world wide open, I want you to understand what came before. Because betrayal doesn't hit as hard unless love once held the door wide open. My name's Delilah Mae Johnson. Born in 1945, raised in South Carolina under sun-drenched porches and the sound of choir rehearsals drifting through kitchen windows. Life didn't come easy, but it came steady. I was a widow by 36. My first husband, James, passed from a heart attack right at our dining table, left me with 3 babies and a mortgage I could barely spell, let alone pay. So I got to work, 2 jobs. Cleaning houses during the day, waitressing at night. I prayed on my feet and cried in my car. But I made it through, by God's grace and my own stubborn will. I raised those kids with more scripture than sugar, and somehow they all turned out okay. And then when I wasn't expecting it, came Harold, the man who'd later become grandpa to my grandbabies. He was polite, well-dressed, and always said yes, ma'am, even when I told him not to. He brought flowers to church on Mother's Day, and he once fixed the church bus even though he didn't go on the retreat. He was the kind of man folks admired from afar. Stable, quiet, dependable. A provider. We weren't perfect. Lord knows we had our ups and downs like any couple stitched together after life's bruises. But I believed we were real, that our bond had been earned through scraped knees, buried husbands, and birthdays where nobody showed up but each other. Harold never raised his voice, but he didn't like too many questions either. Said some things were a man's business. And I didn't push. Back then, silence felt like respect. I see now. It was sometimes just room for secrets. He was charming to the church folks. Oh, they loved him. He wore a good suit, paid his tithes on time, and smiled just enough to make folks think we were lucky to have him. And in many ways, I thought I was. We built a home together. We shared holidays, grandbabies, and grocery lists. I thought I'd done my part, survived the storms, paid my dues, carried the weight. And I always believed, that what you build with sacrifice, you get to enjoy in peace. But peace, I learned, isn't always the absence of noise. Sometimes, peace is just the quiet place where deception learns to grow. I didn't know it then, but that birthday would peel the lid off secrets that had been simmering for years, secrets Harold thought would stay buried in silence. But the thing about truth? It's patient, and it always finds a way to knock. The house was alive that afternoon, just the way I used to imagine heaven might feel. The smell of cinnamon and spice cake filled the kitchen. Someone had brought in a fresh pot of gumbo, and the cornbread was golden crisp around the edges, just the way I taught them. Marvin Gaye was playing low in the background, humming beneath the laughter of grandkids and the clinking of glasses. My daughters were fussing over who made the best macaroni and cheese, again, and one of my sons was leaning back in his chair, belly full and smile wide. There was warmth everywhere, and for a moment I allowed myself to believe I'd finally made it to the peaceful part of life. Then she touched my elbow. My 16-year-old granddaughter, Lena. She stood close beside me, her plate untouched, her smile stiff. I leaned in, thinking she wanted to tell me something sweet, maybe a memory, maybe something about her day. Instead, her voice trembled, barely audible, like it was carrying the weight of something too big for her age. She whispered, "Grandma, you need to get away from Grandpa." It took me a second. A long second. Long enough for a balloon to pop in the living room and someone to cheer over a game of dominoes. Long enough for Harold, my husband, to walk behind me and refill my lemonade, smiling like nothing had just shifted. I blinked, stared at Lena. "What did you say, baby?" I asked, though I heard her perfectly. She didn't answer right away, just looked at me with eyes too old for 16. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Her hand was shaking. Behind me, someone shouted from the kitchen, "Let's cut the cake." But all I could hear now was my own heartbeat. It was the kind of moment where the world keeps spinning, but your own little part of it stops cold. The sound of the music faded. The laughter became distant, hollow. I could see mouths moving and people hugging, but it all looked like something playing on a screen I wasn't part of anymore. I looked at Lena's face. She didn't blink. Then she said again, slower this time, "You need to get away from Grandpa." And that's when I knew. Whatever was on that phone wasn't just gossip or a misunderstanding. It was serious. It was real. And it was about the man I had shared a roof with for 40 years. That cake never got cut. Because right then and there, the warmth in the room turned to ash in my mouth. And the air grew heavy with a truth I hadn't even seen yet, but somehow already felt. I followed Lena out of the kitchen quietly, careful not to draw attention. Everyone was still laughing, still living in the moment I was being pulled away from. My heart thudded against my ribs, heavy and confused, but I didn't ask questions. I didn't press her. I just walked behind her, down the hallway, past the old family portraits on the wall, and into the spare bedroom where I used to keep the Christmas decorations. She closed the door behind us. The air in that little room felt different, like the truth had been waiting there before either of us walked in. Lena sat on the edge of the bed and opened her phone with shaky hands. I stayed standing, unsure of what was about to come, but something deep inside me, something old and knowing, had already braced itself. She didn't say a word, just pressed play. And I saw him. Not with another woman. Not in any affair. No, this was worse. I saw my husband, Harold, sitting at a diner booth, leaning forward, speaking to someone half his age. His voice low, calm, calculated. The same voice that used to read bedtime stories to our grandkids. The same voice that once prayed aloud beside me. Only this time, his words weren't gentle. He was talking about me. About my house. About what would happen when I wasn't around anymore. He laughed, a quiet kind of laugh that didn't belong to the man I'd known. He called me forgetful. Said I was too trusting. He told the woman, whoever she was, that the deed was already halfway in his name. That she won't fight back. She never has. I felt my knees weaken. He went on, talked about how he'd convinced me to sign things over the years, how I wouldn't understand even if I tried. And worst of all, how he was planning to move me into an assisted living facility by the end of the year, once things were settled. Settled. Like I was a chapter he was ready to close. He didn't know he was being recorded. That part was clear. He spoke with the confidence of someone who believed no one was watching. That someone was. And now, so was I. I couldn't speak. I couldn't blink. The screen was small, but the betrayal felt bigger than the room we sat in, bigger than the 40 years we had shared, bigger than the children and holidays and prayers and pain. It was his voice, but not the man I knew. Not the man I defended in front of friends when they raised questions. Not the man I stood beside in sickness and health. Not the man I chose. That man, my Harold, never would have said those things. Never would have laughed about me like that. Never would have looked someone in the eye while tearing down everything I thought we'd built. But this man on the screen, he looked at peace while planning my disappearance from my own life. When the video ended, Lena didn't say a word. She just placed the phone gently in my lap, and I sat there, in silence, the weight of it all pressing down on me. The phone trembled in my hand, or maybe it was me that was trembling. 40 years, gone in under 4 minutes. I sat there for a long time after the video ended. Long enough for the sounds of the party to drift down the hallway again. Forks on plates, laughter bouncing off the kitchen tiles, someone calling out for a second slice of cake. The world was still moving, but I wasn't. I was stuck in a silence I didn't yet know how to break, and that's when it started creeping in. The memories. Little moments. Quiet warnings I had pushed aside over the years. He always kept the finances close to his chest. I didn't ask much. I figured that was how some men were raised. He'd say, "I'll handle the bills, sweetheart. Don't trouble yourself." And I'd let him. Not because I couldn't, but because I believed he would do right by me. He discouraged me from driving after my 60th birthday. Said it was safer. Said he didn't mind taking me where I needed to go. But over time, the car keys stayed in his coat pocket, and my world shrank to what he allowed me to reach. He made little jokes that others laughed at, but they stung me quiet. "Don't give her the checkbook. She still thinks stamps cost 25 cents, he'd say at the table, and everyone would chuckle. I'd smile too, to keep the moment easy. But later, when it was just us, I'd ask him not to say things like that. And he'd brush it off. "Oh, come on. You know I'm just teasing." I told myself it was harmless. I told myself I was lucky. After all, I still had a husband, a warm bed, someone to bring me tea in the evenings. Wasn't that what the world told women my age to be grateful for? But now, looking back, I see it clear. Those weren't just quirks. They were signs. Quiet, creeping vines that wrapped themselves around my independence until I could no longer tell where I ended, and he began. I had bent myself to keep the peace. Nights spent whispering prayers over his pillow while he slept soundly, unaware of the ache in my chest. I defended him when the kids started pulling away, said he was just old-fashioned, misunderstood, tired. But maybe they saw something I refused to see. Maybe they knew before I did. I see it now. The silence I carried wasn't respect. It was training. Slowly, year after year, I'd been groomed into stillness, into shrinking, into believing that keeping the family together meant losing little pieces of myself along the way. I wasn't blind. I was loyal, and I thought that meant staying, but I'd mistaken longevity for love. I thought time alone could redeem behavior. I thought weathering storms meant the sun was guaranteed. I was wrong. Some partnerships don't grow stronger. They just grow old, like fruit left too long on the branch. Looks ripe from the outside, but the inside's already gone soft and bitter. And sitting there in that quiet bedroom, phone still trembling in my hand, I realized I wasn't broken by that video. I was broken by all the years I'd tried to pretend nothing was wrong. Lena sat beside me in that quiet room, her phone now back in her lap, her hands folded, waiting. She didn't rush me, didn't fill the silence with nervous chatter. She just stayed close, like she knew I needed presence more than words. I finally turned to her, still shaken. I asked, softly, "How long have you known?" Her eyes dropped to her knees. She hesitated, and then she said something I'll never forget. "I knew something wasn't right. I just didn't want to hurt you, especially on your birthday." There was no malice in her voice, no self-righteousness, just concern. Gentle, deep concern. And in that moment, I saw her not just as my granddaughter, but as the first person in years who dared to see me fully. The first person who didn't look the other way when the truth felt uncomfortable. Lena was always the quiet one, the thoughtful one. While the other kids played loud and fast, she watched. She noticed things. She told me later that she had overheard Grandpa on a phone call a few months back, late at night while staying over for the weekend. She wasn't trying to snoop. She had simply gone to get a glass of water when she heard his voice in the den, speaking low, like someone with something to hide. She didn't understand everything at first, but she noticed the way his tone shifted when I walked into a room. How he changed the subject quickly. How his eyes hardened just slightly when I asked questions, even simple ones. She told me, "You'd ask something, and he'd look at you like you were bothering him. Like he didn't want to explain anything anymore. But when anyone else was around, he turned on that charm." She noticed the way I laughed too quickly to smooth over tension. How I brushed off his jabs at dinner. How I poured his coffee first, even when mine had gone cold. "I saw you shrink," she said, bit by bit. I hadn't realized anyone had been watching. I didn't even realize I had been shrinking, but she saw it, and she had the courage to say something, to show me. This was the first time in a very long time someone stood beside me. Not behind me, not above me. Beside me. She wasn't trying to lead my life for me. She was trying to help me take it back. And somehow, in that moment, with the truth hanging between us like fragile glass, I didn't feel broken. I felt seen. Sometimes it doesn't take a hero to save you. Just someone brave enough to speak when silence has settled in for too long. Lena broke that silence. And with her help, I was about to break free. After Lena left the room that day and the party carried on without me, I sat in silence for a long while. The voices from the kitchen kept rising, songs, stories, laughter. But none of it touched me anymore. It felt like background noise in a life I no longer recognized. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just decided. I decided I wasn't going to play along anymore. Not with the smiles, not with the silence, not with a man who had been planning my erasure while pretending to love me in public. I didn't storm out of the party. I didn't ruin the cake. I smiled when I rejoined the family, hugged my guests, and took pictures beside Harold, with my hands folded calmly in front of me. Because now I wasn't playing the fool, I was playing for time. That night, when the last dish was washed and the lights were low, I stood alone in the kitchen and made the first move. I started packing, not suitcases, not yet, but in my heart. I packed away the need to be liked. I packed away the belief that I had to be grateful for whatever peace I was given. I packed away the idea that endurance was the same as love. And I got to work. The next morning, I walked down to the credit union and opened a private account in my maiden name. I'd kept a little stash of birthday and holiday money in an envelope taped behind the dresser drawer. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Then I called Janice, a friend from church whose daughter had just passed the bar exam. I didn't give her all the details, just enough. I said I need someone who can help me protect what's left of my life. She didn't ask questions, just gave me a number and said, "Call her today." I did, and then I called my eldest son, the one who moved out west after he and Harold had that falling out all those years ago. I didn't tell him everything, but I told him enough. That something wasn't right. That I might need his support soon. He didn't press me, but I could hear the steel in his voice when he said, "Whatever you need, Mama. I'm here." It was the first time in years I felt like someone truly had my back. That night, I went into the closet and took out my small black suitcase, the one I used to take to revival retreats back in the day. I laid it on the bed, unzipped it, and began placing the essentials. My Sunday dress, the navy one with the pressed collar, my Bible, full of prayers, folded notes, and the letter I wrote to myself the night James passed away, and the updated copy of my will, one I had quietly revised 6 months earlier after Harold started locking away the mail and redirecting the landline calls to his cell. I didn't know why I'd done it at the time, but now I did. Somewhere deep down, I had already started preparing, long before I saw that video. And that's when I realized something important. Freedom doesn't always come with a bang. Sometimes it begins with a quiet shift, a private moment where your spirit whispers, "Enough." And I had reached my enough. That night, I crawled into bed like I always did, slowly, carefully, the way my knees now require. The sheets were cool, the lamp on his side of the bed already off. He was lying there with his back to me, breathing slow and deep like a man who hadn't a care in the world. His breathing was steady. Mine wasn't. I lay there, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. My hand rested on the Bible I'd tucked beneath my pillow earlier that day, like I used to do back when the children were little and storms would rattle the windows. Except this storm was inside me. I could hear the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the tick of the clock on the wall, and the slow, rhythmic sound of Harold's breath, in and out like nothing in the world had shifted. But everything had. I thought about the day we got married, about how he looked in that borrowed suit, nervous but smiling. I thought about the holidays we hosted, the grandkids we held, the prayers we said over meals. I thought about every night I'd stayed up late, folding his shirts, ironing his work pants, seasoning his favorite stew just right. All the pieces of a life I had built around a man who I thought saw me as a partner. And now, here we were. Me, wide awake in the dark, lying next to someone who had calmly plotted to erase me from my own home, from my own life. It was like sleeping beside a stranger, one who still remembered all my favorite scriptures, all my childhood hymns, all the names of our grandchildren. But none of that made him familiar anymore. That's what betrayal does. It doesn't just hurt, it hollows. It leaves someone standing in front of you with the same face and voice, but the meaning behind them is gone. I didn't speak that night. I didn't roll over or touch his shoulder or ask why. I didn't need an answer, I'd already seen it. So I let silence be my sword. Because there are some battles you don't fight with shouting or accusations. You fight them by quietly walking away from the war. And as I lay there in that silence, the same bed we'd shared for 4 decades suddenly felt cold and unfamiliar. But I knew, tomorrow I wouldn't be lying there anymore. The next morning came, just like any other. He stretched, yawned, and asked if I wanted coffee. I said yes. My voice was steady. My hands didn't shake. On the surface, I looked like the same woman I had been the day before, but inside, everything had shifted. While he went about his routine, humming in the kitchen, reading the paper like the world hadn't changed, I moved with quiet purpose. Calm, clear, ready. I had already updated the will weeks ago, long before I ever saw that video. Something had nudged me then, maybe instinct, maybe grace, and I listened. I removed his name from everything. The house, the savings, the documents that once listed him as my emergency contact, all of it. I rewrote my future in black ink and signed it with a hand that had stopped shaking. Instead, I left everything to my grandchildren. All of them. But I made sure Lena, the one who pulled me out of the fog, was looked after in ways she didn't even know yet. There's a separate account with her name on it. For school, for her first apartment, for whatever future she dares to dream. And I didn't stop there. I wrote a letter, a quiet, firm letter sealed in an envelope and handed to my lawyer with clear instructions. If anything ever happens to me, if I fall ill unexpectedly, if I disappear without reason, if I stop answering the phone, deliver this. Deliver it immediately. It wasn't a threat, it was a truth safeguard. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't plotting revenge or fantasizing about dramatic showdowns. I just wanted my peace back. And I wasn't going to beg for it. Not from him, not from anyone. Peace is a right, not a favor. It's not something you earn through silence and sacrifice. It's something you claim when you finally believe you deserve more than just survival. So while he drank his coffee and scrolled through his phone, I sat at the table across from him, looking at the man who no longer had any power over my future. And the beautiful thing? He had no idea. Not a clue what had already been done. Not a single hint that everything he had quietly tried to take from me, I had already taken back. I waited until the morning light broke across the front porch. That quiet hour just before the birds start singing, when the world hasn't fully woken up yet. I had already packed everything I needed, which wasn't much. A suitcase with my Sunday dress, my Bible, a folder of documents, and a photograph of my mother in her garden. That was it. No goodbyes, no drama. Just my suitcase, my truth, and my God. I slipped out the door while he was still sleeping. The same bed, the same sheets, but no longer the same woman lying beside him. I didn't slam the door, I didn't leave a note, I didn't feel the need to explain. Because after years of explaining, of minimizing, of smoothing over sharp edges for someone else's comfort, I was done. I drove to a quiet place, a little rental house on the edge of town that belonged to the cousin of my church friend. I paid cash for the first month. The place was small, but it had everything I needed. A clean kitchen, A front porch and silence, not the kind that smothers but the kind that gives you space to think, to breathe. As the sun rose higher that morning, my phone started buzzing. His name lit up the screen again and again. Voicemails, missed calls, text messages. At first, they were polite, then confused, then sharp. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I sent a message to my lawyer. "It's done. You may proceed." By that afternoon, he had received the paperwork, the revised will, the formal notice of separation, the financial transfers, and a note requesting no further contact. I didn't deliver it personally. I didn't need to. Sometimes, letting go means refusing to re-enter the room where your worth was once debated. A few days later, I heard through one of my nieces. She'd stopped by the house, not knowing I was gone. She told me he stood there, pretending to be stunned, said things like, "I don't know what came over her, and we were fine just yesterday." But deep down, I knew the truth. He knew. He just never thought I'd act on it. He thought the silence meant submission. He thought time had worn me down into someone who would never leave, who wouldn't dare. But what he forgot is that still waters only look calm. Underneath, they know how to rise. A few weeks passed. I had settled into my new rhythm. Quiet mornings, tea on the porch, reading scriptures aloud to myself like I used to when the house was full and the babies were still little. The silence, once foreign and unsettling, now felt like peace. A peace I had carved out, not one handed to me with conditions. Then one afternoon, I got a call from my middle daughter. "He wants to talk," she said. I didn't need to ask who. She told me he had been calling around, reaching out to family, trying to find a way to speak to me. No apologies, just questions, confusion, claims of misunderstanding. She said he looked tired, like the weight of everything was starting to show. I listened to her gently, thanked her for letting me know. But I didn't respond to him, because the truth is, he had my ears for 40 years. He spoke into my life, into my choices, into my fears. He made decisions that affected my future without ever inviting me into the room. He took up space in my story for decades, space I now needed to reclaim. He doesn't need my voice now. There's nothing left to say. And yet, I still pray for him. Not because he asked, not because he deserves it, but because my healing was never going to depend on his remorse. It was always going to be about me choosing to move forward without carrying the wreckage of his choices. Forgiveness for me wasn't a reunion. It was a release. He may never admit what he did. He may never own the quiet harm, the planning behind closed doors, the way he smiled through the damage. But that's not my burden anymore. Because healing isn't about letting them back in. It's about letting yourself walk out and not looking back. If you're still here with me, thank you. The story wasn't easy to tell. But some truths, once they rise to the surface, won't let you rest until they're spoken. So now I want to speak to you, not just as someone who lived through betrayal, but as someone who found her strength in the silence that followed. If someone you trusted ever made you feel small, if they made you second-guess your memory, your worth, your place in your own home, please know this. You are not broken. You were never broken. You were made to survive. You don't have to explain every scar. You don't need to justify your decision to walk away. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply say, "I've had enough," and mean it. And if you're sitting with a truth, one that's been buried deep inside you for years, don't wait as long as I did. Don't wait for the perfect moment or the right words or permission from anyone. Tell it. Heal from it. Let it set you free. Because peace isn't about how quiet your house is. It's not about how others treat you in public or how they smile in family photos. Peace is about knowing who you are when no one is clapping. It's about standing in your own story and saying, "This is mine, and I will not shrink inside it anymore." I left a life behind not out of bitterness, but because I realized I had more life left to live. And if you're listening to this right now, wondering if it's too late for you, let me be the voice that says, you're never too old to begin again. Leave a comment below if you've been through something hard, share your story, or just let us know you're here. You don't have to walk alone. And if this porch light gave you even a flicker of comfort, subscribe to Granny Truths. This porch light never turns off. Thank you. See you next time.